If you encountered a technician working on a military base who displayed perfect combat reflexes, what would you think? She came here merely to fix weapons, but the past isn't so easily forgotten. The question is, what drove a former SEAL operative who saw action in Syria to remain silent for 5 years, until a cruel prank shattered every boundary? And why would a single tattoo on her arm render a training officer speechless before the entire unit? If this story moves you to tears, makes you clench your fists, or simply reminds you of someone who was once bullied and let it slip by like any other video, share it with someone who needs to know that real strength doesn't lie in shouting, but in the silence of courage. Comment: I've seen an Ava in my life. And if you've ever been underestimated, don't worry, you are not alone. This community is here to stand with you. There are people who enter a room and immediately command everyone's attention. Ava Morgan is not one of them. She steps into the armory each morning at 5:45, silent as if she has always been there. Her hair is tied neatly under a khaki cap, her long coat conceals her compact frame, and her steely gray eyes fix on every detail not on any person. Others call her Technician Ava, or simply her. They know nothing more, and they don't care. She speaks little, skips base socials, never lunches with the group. She just works and does it so well she can't be replaced, yet so quietly she's never acknowledged. Training Officer Travis Monroe saw that as a challenge. A man who once was the face of the base, who relished being the center of attention, he could not tolerate someone who commanded respect without asserting herself. The way Ava handled each weapon precise, spotless, and efficient made every other contractor look like an amateur. Rather than acknowledge that professionalism, Monroe chose to crush it. The floors need mopping too, don't they, Morgan? No one does that as well as you. Remarks like these began softly, with a crooked smile, but over time they grew bolder, aimed at her in front of everyone. 6 a.m. briefings became Monroe's stage for authority, with Ava as his routine target. I'm not sure your rifles even fire, but I bet those toilets will sparkle. Laughter rippled, eyes averted. No one stood up for her, not because they agreed, but because they feared becoming the next target. Ava remained silent. She bent over to continue cleaning the weapon, as if the jabs weren't meant for her. Yet behind her eyes, something always shifted, not anger, but calculation. She knew this game. She had seen it many times, not on domestic bases, but on distant battlefields where the enemy wore no uniform. The way Monroe manipulated the atmosphere, struck the match, then stepped back to let others laugh at was no different from a dispersal tactic in combat. But Ava was not here to fight. She had left the battlefield behind. At least she believed she had. Each time she was ordered to mop floors, change light bulbs, or inventory supplies, Ava carried out the task with icy precision. Not out of obedience, but from a principle she could never abandon. Every task must be completed correctly, no matter how small, because she had once witnessed a rifle improperly cleaned cost a comrade his life. From that moment on, negligence in any form became the only enemy she still feared. Ava did not fear being underestimated. She feared carelessness. The deadliest blow does not come from a bullet, but from a pin that wasn't tightened to specification. Beneath her coat's fabric, on her toughened skin, were scars unrecorded by any medical report. The bruise from crashing against a helicopter in the dark, the laceration from falling rocks in a Syrian gorge, the stitch marks from makeshift aid in a field triage when she tried to save a life without a doctor present. No one saw these wounds. Yet each one explained why she kept her head down, working in silence rather than look up to confront. She knew all too well the cost of arrogance, and she understood that sometimes silence is a form of strength. Until the moment she needed to speak. Tuesday, 6 a.m. Mist still clung to the concrete floor. The base had not fully awakened when Monroe swaggered into the armory with a lopsided grin. In his hand was an M110 DMRA semi-automatic sniper rifle reserved only for expert marksmen. "Morgan," he snarled, tossing the rifle onto the table as though it were a broken toy. "Inspect this. My team's using it this afternoon. Don't let it blow up on us." A few soldiers behind him chuckled harshly, a familiar intimidation tactic. But this time, something felt different. Ava did not look at him. She reached out and caught the rifle with both hands, as if handling something alive. She asked no questions, made no complaint. She silently laid the M110 on the bench and began disassembling it piece by piece. In the steadily filling room, Ava seemed almost ghost-like amid the crowd, yet each of her movements carried a breathtaking weight. Her right hand held the tool, her left hand steadied the parts. Not one motion was wasted. She handled the rifle as a cardiac surgeon handles the human heart. Then she paused. In a voice barely above a whisper, she delivered her findings as though pronouncing a diagnosis. The gas tube is bent by 2.8 degrees. The sight pin is misaligned on its axis. The chamber shows corrosion from non-standard chemicals. Silence fell. No one laughed. Some technicians exchanged pale glances. A few young soldiers whispered among themselves, realizing this was no joke. Monroe froze like a statue. Ava rotated the M110, pointed its muzzle down on the table, her eyes ice cold. At low temperatures, firing this rifle will cause uneven barrel expansion. The probability of a catastrophic backblast is approximately 17%. She did not need to shout. Her calm was the highest form of threat. A few men stepped back. Monroe still tried to keep his icy demeanor, but no one looked at him the same way anymore. The truth had been exposed, yet Ava was not finished. She bent over the bench drawer and pulled out a small, worn plastic box. She carefully opened it. Inside lay a gas pressure gauge, a model out of production since 2013. Its casing was cracked, one corner chipped. She lifted it with both hands as if it were something sacred. "This belonged to Ethan Park." Her voice cracked. Someone in the room held their breath. Only a few knew that name. But to Ava, it represented everything left from a day no one wanted to revisit. Kandahar, November. A 36-hour reconnaissance turned ambush. Ava was trapped with Ethan after the main squad withdrew. She was wounded, unable to lift her rifle. Ethan used his own back as a shield for her for 23 minutes. When the rescue arrived, he was dead. And this pressure gauge was the only intact item in his pack, a mundane tool, but to her a relic. "We once argued about using the correct gas tube," Ava said, her eyes never leaving the gauge in her hands. "I thought he was overly cautious, but now I understand. Caution can be the only thing that keeps someone from being left behind in a body bag." She replaced the device into its box and closed the lid carefully. Then she looked at Monroe, not with anger, not with contempt, only with the gaze of someone who knows what matters and what will be forgotten. And in that moment, everyone in the room realized they hadn't just tampered with a rifle. They had touched something they must never touch, a piece of her soul. The atmosphere in the room felt stretched to its breaking point. After she closed the lid on the plastic box containing Ethan's gauge, no one spoke. Even Monroe no longer curled his lips into a smirk or played the orchestrator. That hushed the stillness after a truth laid bare weighed heavier than any accusation. Ava rose to her feet. But this time was different, not to withdraw, not to step away, rather to move forward. Each motion bore its own weight. She carefully removed her gloves, folding them neatly at her side. Pausing only for a heartbeat, she began to pull back her left sleeve. Each fold of fabric turned back with deliberate care, as though unlocking an ancient door sealed for years. On her strong forearm was a faded tattoo, dark beneath skin hardened by sun, wind, and time. the Navy SEAL emblem, a bald eagle clutching an anchor and a rifle intertwined like a silent oath. Beneath it, a Latin inscription carved deep, its ink worn but still remarkably legible. Servare vitam per silentium, to protect life through silence. No one spoke. No one moved. Even the hum of the air conditioner in the corner seemed to vanish. They looked at that arm not out of curiosity, but with the sense that they faced something they no longer dared to underestimate. Ava let them look, once, and only once. Then she let her sleeve fall. I was Petty Officer First Class Ava Morgan, a SEAL operator. Team 5. I lost 3 brothers Saul, killed by needless mistakes, and I vowed never to let another die because of a faulty rifle. Her words were not raised in volume, yet they cut through every layer of skin and thought in the room, most of all Monroe. His smirk had vanished, replaced by a stunned emptiness as if he'd been struck not by a fist, but by truth. Ava surveyed the room, her gaze devoid of blame, only resolve and a quiet sorrow. His name was Ethan Park, the best I ever worked with, the man who triple-checked every weapon before letting it go, the man I quarreled with because he was too cautious, the man who used his body as a shield for me and never came back. She paused, her voice dropping. I carry that gauge not to remember the pain but to never forget the lesson. A young soldier in the back swallowed hard. Another bowed his head not from shame, but because they were beginning to understand. In a world where silence is often equated with weakness, Ava had shattered that prejudice in the strongest way, not with a shout, but with truth. No need for credentials to prove it. No need to broadcast the mission. All it took was a tattoo, a memory, a vow. In that moment, they no longer saw her as the weapons tech, no longer the silent contractor, no longer the solitary figure in the shop. They saw her as if emerging from an old photograph of a generation of warriors. A ghost returned, a legend they never thought still lived. And after all those years, Ava finally allowed herself to be seen. Dear viewers, take a moment to relax or grab a drink, then continue listening. More surprises lie ahead. Comment 1 if this story moved you, so we know you're still here. When people think of revenge, they imagine rage, shouting, the enemy's downfall played out before their eyes. But Ava Morgan didn't learn revenge from movies. She learned it on the battlefield, where any emotional outburst is a fatal vulnerability. The next morning, Ava arrived earlier than usual. No one noticed. She walked into the administration office with silent steps and an unreadable gaze. In her hand was a thick dossier bound in clear plastic covers, its edges neatly taped, 93 pages, not a line missing, not a word in excess. The clerk who received the filia lieutenant in charge of internal affairs started when he saw Ava's name on the cover. But his expression shifted as he flipped through the pages, extracted camera footage from the armory, close-up photographs of the faulty weapon, detailed date and time logs, statements from 2 other contractors, and an audio clip. In it, Monroe's voice was unmistakable. Let's see if that little girl dares to open her mouth. No one on the base had ever seen Ava emerge from the shadows with such resolve. But what earned their respect and fear wasn't the dossier itself, but how she delivered it, without a moment's loss of composure, without a single harsh word. She was simply precise. Monroe was summoned for questioning 3 times over the next 2 weeks. Each time, he tried excuses, deflections, rallying allies. But evidence has no allies. And the very system he had trusted to shield him now acted like a well-oiled machine powered by truth. One night, he found in his personal locker a photocopy of the report, with a handwritten line. You think I was silent out of weakness. Number, I was only waiting for the right moment for you to step on the very things you built. No signature, but he knew exactly who wrote it. Some on the base whispered that Ava was getting revenge, but anyone perceptive would see. This was not revenge. This was restoring order. Ava did not seek to destroy Monroe. She intended to remove a rotten link from the chain so that younger people entering this environment would not have to shed blood, as she once did, to make it right. She understood the power game better than anyone. She had once dismantled a Taliban command post, using nothing but a forged map and 4 days of patience. To topple an officer like Monroe required no violence, only truth, deployed at the right moment, in the right place, and beyond refutation. The dossier was forwarded to the regional command. An expanded investigation ensued. And when the decision came, it did not arrive with bells or sirens, just a Monday morning email with the subject line, "Personnel Reassignment." Monroe was transferred to a logistics training center up north, stripped of command and authority. But notably, Ava had not requested this. She made no recommendation for punishment. She simply provided the facts and let the system correct what it had allowed to slip. On the day Monroe left the base, no one came to see him off. Ava was busy in the armory, inspecting the new weapons shipment. When she heard the news, she merely nodded, as if part of her work were complete. She did not smile, nor did she revel in satisfaction. She knew a man like Monroe would torment himself far longer than any formal penalty. For what he faced was not just the loss of power, but the reckoning with a woman he once underestimated, who had proven that silence does not equal defeat. After the incident, many expected Ava to vanish as quietly as she had arrived. But she did not leave. She stayed not to dwell on the past, but to build the future. 3 months later, a new sign appeared on the rusty iron gate of the old warehouse row. Valor Rebuilta Pre, Special Operations Training Pilot Program for Female Soldiers and Civilian Contractors. The idea was initially controversial. Some commanders doubted that Ava, once anonymous veteran, could lead a program to overhaul a training structure long dominated by men. But the combination of her discreet service record and quiet backing from former teammates opened doors. They knew who she was, and more importantly, they knew what she had sacrificed. The training camp took place in repainted shipping containers and makeshift wooden benches. But there, every hour was serious. Every exercise carried purpose. Ava did not teach marksmanship first. She taught how to bandage a comrade's wound, how to share ration bars amid scarcity, how to recognize signs of panic in a teammate. She began with the smallest essentials because she believed the strongest soldier is the one who never leaves anyone behind. Then one day, she made a decision no one saw coming. She formally invited Travis Monroe, reassigned, stripped of commando, rejoin the program as a trainee. Many objected. Even members of her own team asked bluntly, "Why bring him back after everything he did?" Ava offered no defense. She simply replied, "No one should be exempt from relearning the things they once did wrong." Monroe appeared on the first day of training with his usual cold gaze and stubborn set to his jaw. No rank insignia, no officers under him, just a middle-aged man in faded military fatigues, stepping among those he once disdained. On day 1, he said nothing. On day 2, he asked no questions. But by week 3, when assigned to lead a high-altitude search team, he became disoriented. A young female soldier whom he had once labeled weak turned back, pulled him from the danger zone, and wordlessly handed him a canteen of water before moving on. That evening, when Ava approached him after training, he looked at her for a long moment. He spoke no apology. But his eyes admitted what his entire career never had. "I didn't understand. Now I'm beginning to." In the 5th week, Ava led the entire group to the urban combat training range. She divided them into squads and appointed Monroe to command one team. The test was a hostage rescue, but not with rifles, rather through coordination, observation, and maintaining team morale. Monroe failed. As he prepared to blame himself, Ava handed him an old photographer team in Syria when they, too, had failed a similar exercise. On the back, a handwritten note from Ethan read, We don't win by strength. We win by leaving no one behind. It was the first time Monroe truly bowed his head. From that moment, he ceased to be the punished one. He became part of the rebuilding effort. The Valor Rebuilt program gradually grew stronger. People began calling it the second school for soldiers. Ava still led every morning's class. Monroe sat at the back silently taking notes, occasionally straightening a young soldier's stance, or quietly sharing a technical tip he had now learned from those he once targeted. No one forced him to feel grateful. Yet every small action he took became a silent thank you to a woman who chose to forgive not because he deserved it, but because she refused to let anyone else bear scars as she had. 2 years can pass in the blink of an eye, especially in the military, where each day echoes with marching boots, live-fire drills, and pre-dawn roll calls. Yet some moments, however brief, leave marks deep enough to change a life. Travis Monroe is no longer the man he once was. Standing before today's CLASA, special cohort of 18 female candidates newly admitted to special operations training, he stands without the trappings of rank, stripped of the arrogance that once haunted so many. His hair is flecked with gray, but his eyesons as cold as steel have softened, as if every word he's about to speak is measured by his heart. Someone once told me, he began, his voice low and measured, that true strength doesn't come from giving orders. It comes from bowing your head so you can lift others up. Not one student stirred. They had never heard Monroe tell stories, much less about himself. He spoke of Avenant in grandiose terms, but with sincerity. He recalled the day he threw her that broken M110 and thought it was a victory. He remembered the morning she rolled back her sleeve and showed the entire room that they weren't humiliating just a contractor, they were humiliating someone who had survived fire and lost her brothers in arms. At that moment, he paused, his gaze drifting to his own hands. I didn't see a woman. I saw myself when I first enlisted, when I believed my only worth came from power. At the back of the room sat Ava in silence. She wore her faded brown jacket, her hair tied neatly, her eyes unchanged, neither cold nor soft, but bright, as though she'd witnessed more than they could ever imagine. Beside her was Isabel Monroe's only daughter. Small in stature but resolute in gaze, she'd just aced the program's toughest physical test, ranking second in her class. She didn't know every detail of her father's past with Ava, but she knew enough to understand that today was more than a lecture. It was a passing of the torch. When class ended, Ava rose and approached him quietly, simply, as she always did. In her hands was a small, scuffed metal box. She opened it to reveal a silver seal trident worn smooth by years of service. This belonged to Ethan Park, she said softly, handing it to Isabel with both hands. He was the finest of us all, the one who never came home. Isabel accepted the gift, her hands trembling slightly. She looked up at Ava, then at her father. Monroe nodded silent. In his eyes shone pride mingled with regret, as though he were finally returning words left unspoken his entire life. Ava gently touched Isabel's shoulder. Carry this with you, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. But remember, true strength is knowing when you don't need to use it. The room held its breath for a moment. No one shed tears. Yet within each of them something had been cleansed, pain set down, a little lighter. Monroe watched as Ava left the room. He did not follow. He no longer needed to, for he understood that true redemption does not lie in an apology. It lies in living differently, day by day. That day, no cameras recorded. No posts went viral. But for those present, it was a lesson no training syllabus could teach, that the strong are not those who never fall, but those brave enough to change themselves before it's too late. In this world, there are countless people who have been misunderstood, belittled, or pushed into the shadows simply for choosing silence. But Ava Morgan's story reminds us that sometimes strength does not lie in reclaiming justice through power, but in patient endurance and timely forgiveness. She did more than expose an injustice. She healed a system and the people within it. She did not destroy Monrovia, gave him the chance to become the person he never dared to imagine. And on that journey, she also found peace for herself. If you have ever been an Ava carrying your pain in silence while no one noticed then, this story is here to remind you, you are not alone. There is a community ready to listen and stand by your side. Share this video if it touched your heart. Leave a comment, I used to be silent, now I want to be seen. And don't forget to follow the channel so you won't miss the stories that make you believe people can change and deserve forgiveness.